This podcast is a production of the Brickyard Network. To find out more about our lineup of ceramic podcasts, visit brickyardnetwork.org.
This episode is brought to you by Cornell Studio Supply, located in the gem city of Dayton, Ohio. Find all your pottery and ceramic sculpture equipment and supplies with the best customer service and world-class workshops. Join us for our upcoming Rocket Kiln Workshop with Lisa Orr, July 18th through the 20th, 2025. Visit CornellStudioSupply.com to sign up. Cornell Studio Supply, owned and operated for potters by potters.
This episode is brought to you by Snow Farm, the New England Craft Program. Are you looking to take your ceramic skills to the next level? Check out the incredible 2 to 5 day workshop offerings at Snow Farm, where world-class ceramic artists lead hands-on immersive workshops in wheel throwing, hand building, surface design, and more. Whether you're just starting or refining your voice in clay, there's a workshop for you. Set in the stunning Berkshire Hills of Western Massachusetts, this residential craft school is the perfect place to create, connect, and get inspired. To register for a workshop today, visit snowfarm.org. Welcome to the Tales of a Red Clay Rambler podcast, featuring interviews with culture makers from around the world. This is Ben Carter. I'm going to be your host. If you'd like more information on the show, please visit our website, talesofaredclayrambler.com. Welcome back to episode 548 of the podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Today on the show, I am talking with Kyle Triplett, who pairs hundreds of ceramic elements with digital projections and lightworks that highlight the human relationship with land and place. In our interview, we talk about making site-specific work, his interest in blending physical and digital space, and the Morian Ceramic Research Center in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Triplett is the Morian Distinguished Professor in Ceramics at Western Michigan University and the Director of the Research Center. If you'd like to find out more, visit kyletriplett.com. Before we get to that interview, I wanted to thank the folks that came out to my workshop last week at UNR Lake Tahoe. It was great to be up in the mountains again. We had crazy weather. We had everything from 80-degree beach days to a freak snowstorm that was causing 8-foot waves in the middle of the lake. So it was exciting to say the least, and I thoroughly enjoyed being able to soda fire again. We were working on low-fire soda, and I got some great results out of the kiln. If you want to check that out, you can look at those on my Instagram. That's Carter Pottery. I did want to mention that I've got one more workshop coming up August the 14th through the 17th at Snow Farm. If you're interested in building layers through mark making and pattern, join me for a weekend full of experimentation and learning. You can register today at the link in the show notes. Without further ado, we'll get to the interview. I thought we would actually go back and go to the very beginning and talk about South Dakota and what it was like to grow up there. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I growing up, I had kind of a split experience in South Dakota. So I grew up in Spearfish, which is in the northern Black Hills. Spearfish is the last town before you get to Wyoming. And that is very much pine trees, akin to Wyoming and Montana landscapes, if you want to think about it like that. And then we also had both sides of my family come from farming. And so South Dakota is interesting in the fact that the Missouri River splits it, and the west side feels very western and plains, and then the Black Hills is trees. And then the east side looks like southern Minnesota and Iowa. It's cornfields nonstop. And so I think for my work, those two things, those two kind of separate environments that are both natural places, but the east side being this very cultivated space. Um, Not that I don't love being outdoors in the wild, but I just remember, and this was something I totally fought against in graduate school for a long time. My professor, Brad Schwigger's from Iowa, and it's like, your work just is so, South Dakota. And it's like, no, it's not. Because growing up there, it's a very sort of isolated place. And so if you want big city, you either have to go to Minneapolis or Denver, and both of those are about 8 hours away. And I don't know that I remember feeling isolated, but once I left and went to undergrad in Missouri, the isolation really kind of became apparent and how sort of separate it is from a lot of things. And not in a bad way. It's just that definitely influenced my work and thinking. And, having lived in a lot of other places that um, are a little more connected, I think it's something that I could imagine it being difficult to be an artist there now.
It seems like the connection that you might have had with other people in a really big city growing up, you actually had with the land because you were not in a big city.
Right.
A sense of place is something that I see popping up when people describe your work and when you describe your own work. So, can you talk about the first landscapes that you really felt a connection with?
I think there's a couple things. One is, as I talked about, that sort of cultivated land, so row crop. I think I really like right angles and straight lines. And so as a kid, going to somewhere where planting was happening or somebody was running a combine was really interesting to me how things become ordered and systematic. And, now as an artist, I look back and think about the sort of relationship we have with sort of the natural world. And those spaces almost seem somewhat unnatural because of the cultivation, because of the sort of we sort of apply these human rules to the way that space exists. And then um, when I went to undergrad in Missouri, going up to St. Louis became kind of my big city experiences. And there's a ton of history in St. Louis, and it's a really interesting town, being right next to the Mississippi River. But again, those kind of become these markers of understanding how, as a young adult, how different my experience was growing up, and peoples and cultures and architecture that I don't think I thought about in South Dakota because it just doesn't exist. And everywhere feels very distant and far away and other, as opposed to, and I didn't grow up in a tiny town. I mean, Spearfish is 10 to 12,000 people. It's actually a bigger town in South Dakota, and there's a university there. So it's not completely isolated. I mean, we still had like three radio stations, four if you count farm radio, and which is, one of those things of being in the rural areas. But yeah, those kind of initial, I think, as a young kid being interested in big trucks and farm equipment, and like I said, those really stuck with me in a way that I didn't really unpack until grad school.
We're going to talk about grad school a little bit, but I wanted to first talk about the way your work makes me feel. It often makes me feel small, which I think is a good thing. Like as the viewer, it makes me feel like that the work is bigger than me. And you often will do that through either like filling up a sight line. Like there was this one piece I was looking at where you essentially had an old movie theater or like a projection space. You had filled that up with thousands of ceramic plant-based objects. But then when you're looking at it, you're getting the sense, or the viewer's getting the sense, that the nature part of this exchange is much bigger and infinite, and our perception is not. Like our perception is limited and focused. Can you talk about that smallness, or maybe that's just my perception? Can you talk about how you, as the artist, are trying to shape the way I feel in this digital and physical landscape of the work?
Well, there's a couple things. One is my work is pretty heavily influenced by Hudson River paintings, Hudson River school paintings, Cole, Church, and grandeur, or this sort of giganticness, this sort of unimaginable, sort of understandableness of landscape becomes a really powerful emotion. And then with the piece that you're talking about and a lot of other installated pieces that I built, I'm interested in the sort of picturesque. So this way of imaging landscape where there, because I remove a certain amount of interaction that sort of naturally happens with landscape, you're sort of required to sort of sit here and look out. We can think about vistas. We can think about, you're visiting the national park and you pull over to the side of the road and there's maybe those weird binoculars that you have to throw a couple quarters in. And, I'm interested in that imaging of landscape to then play with metaphors, to talk about scale, to talk about a sort of a here and a there, to talk about desire, longing. Um, but I'm less interested in the physical experience of the landscape and more about allowing you to sort of allow these emotions to sort of build up. And maybe it is one. I wish I could touch it. I wish I could, you stand in front of the ocean and you want to stick your feet in, but you're also realizing that this thing can produce terror because it can also kill you. Right. And sort of that kind of gets into some things with the sublime. But um yeah, that grandeur becomes very powerful because we're dealing with a scale that is beyond us.
Yeah, and there's something also that makes stillness, it enforces a stillness in me because I have to sit and perceive it, which I appreciate. Like there's almost like a meditational aspect to the work where a lot of times you'll have a repeated ceramic element, like the piece that's magnolias, like the magnolia blooms and pied. They're lined up horizontally in a long line. Like I don't even know how long that piece was, 20 feet maybe.
Uh, 40, almost 40 feet.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So there's this sense of stillness in me because I'm trying to take it all in at once, but I'm also getting sucked into the detail. So there's this like interesting thing about seeing something from a distance and being awed by it, but then also wanting to like get up close to it and figure out with the Magnolia piece specifically, like, what is that?
Something I always think about with the work is building in moments where we challenge scale in a way of like we either, there's something very intimate about crouching down and getting close to something, but there's also maybe an opposite experience of having to step back and really take it in. So with certain works, if there's room enough in the gallery space, allowing for rewards for the viewer to come close and investigate, and Clay does a really great job of allowing certain details and touch to happen and things feel delicate. But then there's also with a lot of my work, these constructions that feel architectural and gigantic and at a scale that we maybe would recognize more as a building or structure that requires us to sort of stand back and take it all in. The piece that you spoke about with the movie theater, it literally is an old movie theater in Nelsonville, Ohio. And so that piece goes back 32 feet into the sort of single theater space. And what I did there is I played around with forced perspective. So the floor rises and the ceiling lowers and the sides come in. So kind of your classic drawing a hallway situation, but it makes things seem bigger and it draws your eye in to play with that space and maybe to make things feel elongated. But then again, the clay allows for these really sort of tender moments, and think about the fragility of stuff like that.
Do these ideas, and I know we're talking about two different installations, but do ideas like this come to you in a flash, like you can almost see the thing you're going to build? Or is there some progressiveness of the idea? Like you start, so the one in the movie theater had, thousands of objects you made. Like do you start making a few and then that leads you to make more? Or is it that you start with this grand vision?
My perfect world scenario is working with a space that allows me to do something new, which is not always possible. Sometimes they want the thing that's in the image, and I'm way more interested in like just taking over a space. So my work process goes with identifying a space, looking at the floor plan, looking at ceiling height, stuff like that, and then thinking about how that space is used, the movie theater has a sort of single entrance up at the front of the room. Okay, so now I can either allow the audience to kind of walk through this space, or I can deny that space to them somehow. Um, Certain galleries, I've had a few spaces that have these really beautiful glass walls. So it's like, okay, cool. So now my space almost doubles in a way, and I can get the audience coming through the door of the building. I can get them coming through the door in the gallery space. And then several of my installations, I'm also playing around with some type of projection as well. And so using a video piece or a still projection also as a way of sort of demarcating space, but kind of creating a directional nature to the work. Again, stand here and look out, look forward. They're really, every piece is unique, and I've certainly got some tricks that I can fall back on. The multiple has become really important in my work to talk about. I think initially talking about row crops and sort of the repetitive nature of grass. At one point, one of my graduate professors in grad school, Alex Hibbett, asked me if I was going to be the grass man for the rest of my life. So I'm glad I've moved on from that. But that that repetitive nature to me is really interesting, because I think I don't know, one of my bumper stickers is this idea of understanding that it's completely impossible to recreate the experience of nature, but I do think there's something interesting in the attempt. And the multiple speaks to that, not only with crops or grass, but it suggests this sort of infinite nature to it, right? It sort of just continues. And that's where I use a lot of slip casting in my work. I use a lot of molds in my work. You mentioned the magnolia piece. Um, that repetitive nature, I don't know what that says about my personality, but I find it really satisfying to think about sort of physically, emotionally, lots of Netflix just recreating these things over and over again, and allowing that sort of mass to also talk about vastness in landscape.
When you have a student, because you're a professor and you have grads and undergrads and postbacks, when you have a student that comes and pitches you an idea for an installation sculpture with multiple elements, similar to what you're doing, how do you talk to them and sort of let them know the pitfalls of that style of work, or let them know the pros of that style of work? Or do you just let them roll and they're going to figure out the same things you figured out over time?
I think the first thing I want them to understand is that space and light are materials, because they may come in with, oh, I got this translucent porcelain. When the light goes through it, it does this really beautiful thing. It's like, okay, well, we'll get to that. But first, talking about the physicality of being within space. We're really lucky at Western. We've got some really nice big critique spaces that students can use for installations. But um, I think the second thing is I want to make a lot of these, and it's like, well, what do you mean a lot of them? Because a couple hundred feels like a certainly a goal, and then as things start to be hung, and maybe you're dealing with tall ceilings, it's like, wow, when they get in the air, they actually seem a lot smaller, and they see feels like a lot fewer, right? And then it becomes, okay, is this something where we are sort of immersed in it? Are we walking through something? Are we standing here and looking at something? Are you adding light? Are we using the gallery lights? How do you feel right now? Does it feel quiet? Does it feel loud? Um, one of my uh, grad students just had their thesis show, and we were kind of talking about. I really feel like openings are the worst time to look at art, and that's really true with installations. And then it's like, okay, well, how do we do this? Do we have, and I said, we can have, someone from the gallery sort of letting people in a couple at a time. Like, what is the sweet spot? Is this piece meant for one person, two people, a family, eight people? What is the sweet spot before this gets sort of congested, and people get anxious and they want to get out of the way, or they're not, I'd like to sit on the bench, but I can't sit on the bench. And I think all of those components that are maybe not, are certainly not part of making sort of autonomous standalone sculpture, whether it's on the floor or the wall, um, need to be considered. Um, again, I think because we've got these spaces, I think it's an option. I also like try to tell students too that installation is really complicated in terms of building work because um, gallery walls are never straight, floors are never level. You might not be able to hang from the ceiling. And then you kind of have to show up, at least I do. I show up and it looks like I am running a contracting business because inevitably something has to be altered, the plan has to change, and that sort of flexibility, I think I probably thrive on, but certain people I could see where it's just like this isn't going to go well for you because um inevitably something comes up. Inevitably you're at Home Depot 9 times trying to figure out how do I had a show in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and was made aware that they have small earthquakes pretty regularly from fracking. And so I had to go to the Home Depot and get this like super duper double-sided tape because they had these light boxes that would vibrate enough. And they were just like, really don't want these to fall over. And, who thinks about that? I certainly didn't. So it adds a little level of complexity that some students, everyone's capable of doing it, certainly, but it is different than just throw a nail in the wall, set it on a pedestal, and walk away.
Well, you mentioned Home Depot, and it's a good addendum to something I was thinking about is that you often will use light in the work, either projections or static lights that emit almost like a halo effect, or it like creates an atmospheric light within the work. But sometimes lights can look cheap, and also wood. Like when you're building the apparatuses that hold the work, sometimes wood can look cheap. So how do you push and hell, sometimes clay looks cheap. I mean, I guess this is just a general materiality question, but how do you push a material that might appear to be cheap into the sublime by the way you arrange it? Like, how do you actually transform the way we perceive those materials?
It's a great question. Because I guess I'm very interested in using things in a very direct way. So I usually work with raw clay bodies. I'm interested in sort of capturing that touch. When I move into wood or plexi, steel, still very much interested in using in its natural state. I think ways to manipulate, as you're suggesting, those materials sometimes are as stupid as, if you take a 2x4 and you run it back through the table saw and you take the rounded edges off. So now it's like instead of being 3.5 inches, it's like a 1.5 by 3 inch thing. It retains this rectangularness that doesn't look like a 2x4 anymore. Sanding off the print on the 2x4 also is just an easy way to kind of take the 2x4-ness out of it, right? Selecting plywoods that, one thing I think about with plywoods is I'm not interested in stuff feeling or looking like furniture. So, and veneer is actually just, I hate veneer because it's so hard to cut, and it can get, if it gets damaged, it's hard to fix. And so, I use this very specific cabinet grade plywood that I get at Menards. God bless Menards. But it travels well. It looks like plywood, right? And I don't try to deny the plywoodness of things. In the same way when I'm working with anything that's plugged in, I'm very much interested in leaving the sort of plugged inness, the cordedness of things very apparent without being a hazard. And so I intentionally use a type of electrical cord that is clean. It doesn't have any print on it, but I want the piece to feel constructed in a way. I want you to see that there's electricity being drawn out of the space, and this thing is almost breathing in front of you in certain ways. And for me, light has, there's no other word to say other than energy to it, and a certain warmth to it. And whether it's projection or using fluorescence or LEDs in my work, I'm really intentional about where light is and how it's placed. And one is it's illumination and it's allowing you to experience things, but I want it to feel sort of ambient and almost like a filter to the way you're looking at things.
Can you talk about how you use Rhino or even your sketchbook to sort of plan all this stuff out before it gets to the gallery to be shown?
The process goes, I get the floor plan from galleries, and all of us exhibiting artists know that floor plans from galleries come in very different shapes and sizes and accuracies, which is all, you don't expect architectural drawings, but so I take that floor plan and then, yeah, I utilize a 3D modeling software called Rhino. And when I taught at Louisiana Tech, I worked in the School of Design and didn't teach architecture, but worked alongside architects and picked up some tricks and tips on the way they utilize that tool. And one of them was just, okay, I have this ability to uh, create a virtual version of the gallery. I construct the walls, I construct the doors, and then I am able to, in my mind and in the software, physically walk through the space and think about, okay, if I stand here, if I look up, okay, how tall are the ceilings? If I place sculpture here, if I place a projector here, what's its throw rate? And so I build the sculpture, the installations in Rhino as a virtual model. Certainly not down to the pinch and the clay. I usually kind of have kind of dumb shapes for certain things, but um, it allows me to, because installations are, I don't have the space to create these installations where I work or where my studio is. So everything is a calculated guess when I get to the gallery. And so Rhino allows me to do a certain amount of problem solving and think about the sort of physical relationship to the work and scale. I have like, um, as Rhino, I can drop in a 6 foot tall humanoid object and think about, okay, how do we respond to this height? And, again, how are people going to enter and exit the space? Is there glass involved, et cetera? Um, that also allows me to, again, using the multiple in my work, I'm very quickly able to see what 2000 grass blades are going to look like, and maybe certainly make some. Is this a good idea? Is this going to work? How many 2x4s do I need? How much material? That is really my sketchbook. I think everything before that is copier paper and napkins. I really don't. I've never been one to keep I'm really impressed with people that do keep dedicated sketchbooks, but um, I I really live in my head a lot with my work, and part of that is, during the day as a full-time professor, I sort of steal a few minutes when I can in faculty meetings and walking, to to roll things around in my head. And Rhino allows me to go and have a little bit of satisfaction, the fact that I can think about, oh, okay, shoot, if the angle of this changes, or maybe I use a different projector that's got a larger throw length so I can make a bigger image, this actually becomes kind of cool. It allows me to work through those ideas.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art. The collection exists as an online resource for research and inspiration, featuring photos of over 4,000 objects made by over 1,000 artists. The images are high quality and can be used with no permission required, making them a great resource for students and teachers. To find out more, visit rosenfieldcollection.com. This way of working started in grad school and just got grander. Like you started making bigger installations and bigger things. But what academia does for you as a professor now is that it supports this type of research, because you're making objects or you're making objects that go in installations. But I think architects can relate to your work. I think environmental engineers can relate to your work. Like, I think the academic setting supports your type of work. When in your career did you realize, like, okay, I really need an institution that thinks research is important and not that research is secondary to teaching?
It's a great question. Well, I should maybe say that to kind of Working in installation means that you never have a price tag on anything. It's always money out the door, not in the door. And so, as an installation artist, you're reliant on uh, institutions, whether they be museums, certainly non-for-profit gallery spaces, but um, I primarily have shown on university campuses because there's programming, there's a dedication to a type of art. I am a creature of the uh, um, I really feel like uh, um, one thing that became really apparent when I got to graduate school at Ohio University is um, at the time, things have changed a lot since I was at OU, but at the time, critiques took place at this old mental hospital in Athens. And at the mental hospital, which is up the hill from the studio, there was these big, and I don't know what they were originally. This building was built a little after the Civil War, so these spaces have really changed a lot. And it was the first opportunity where I had a large space all to myself, and I was able to think about how to tackle it and what the work could be in these spaces. And um, leaving graduate school and moving into my first teaching positions, I had an opportunity to. I taught at Kansas State for a year with Amy Sanforo, and again, I was able to build an installation in their gallery spaces, and then it kind of started to click. It's like, okay, this is where your work's going to live, and until some big institution calls, this is where your work's going to live is in sort of university um, spaces. And yeah, the nature of my job is to teach and to do research, and um, you know being attached to an academic institution provides for that research. It allows for Sometimes it allows for funding to support the work. Other times it just allows me to be creative and express my ideas without the necessity of covering the mortgage as well. And so, as much as my wife would prefer that I probably don't spend as much money as I do on my work, like I'm able to take that hit to get the idea out. And um, when those opportunities happen, they're really exciting. But they're also, the financial end of that also means that realistically, two installations a year is probably as much as I can handle physically and financially.
Can you talk about Western Michigan and also the university, but also the Kalamazoo area and what it's like to live in that area?
So we moved to Kalamazoo from Ruston, Louisiana in 2019, right before the pandemic. And my partner and I both really didn't know a lot about Michigan other than cars, cars and lakes. And Kalamazoo has turned out to be just an amazing place to live, to work. And Michigan, as someone who is a mixed media artist, is fantastic because everything's made in like Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. So any material that I need is a very short drive away if I can't get it in Kalamazoo, and usually I can find most things in Kalamazoo. Um, the Kalamazoo area is, I think, around 200,000 people. It's very spread out. I always think of it as kind of a big little city. Kalamazoo is originally home to Gibson Guitars. That's kind of one of our big claim to fame. And we're 45 minutes from Lake Michigan. There's a lot of really pretty stuff just north of us. But I think something that myself and my colleague Jessica Brandel have really come to love about Michigan is it's a very working class state. It's a space where it's a state, it's a community where innovation is very much a part of the culture here. We build things in Michigan kind of mentality. We can take that on. And a lot of the students that we get students from Chicago, Detroit, northern Indiana area, but I think they come to Western because it's not as big as some of the Big Ten schools that are around here. um, I think, again, I just see a really nice sort of working class quality, hardworking very Midwestern, not very limited hot sauce selections at restaurants, which being from South Dakota, things feel very much at home that way. Everybody's very nice. My job at Western, again, really allows for a lot of different opportunities, both in teaching and research, which I'm very thankful for.
You or the organization has a relationship with Beth Morian, who I believe was an alum of Western Michigan, right? That's the original connection. And she's
Yes.
been very generous in supporting your specific department, but also supporting the university. Can you talk a little bit about the research center, the Morian Ceramic Research Center, as well as the relationship y'all have with Beth?
Beth is an alumni at WMU, proud alumni. In 2018, 2019, a gift was set up that creates a couple different things for us. One is my position, so I'm an endowed professor through the endowment. It's created the Morian Ceramics Research Center, which is an institution on campus where we host summer workshops right now. We're hoping to expand that, but we're in our fifth year of hosting summer workshops where we bring in two visiting artists for 2 weeks on campus that work with not only our students, but these workshops are open to anyone who would like to take them. They're very much set up in the craft school style, so very similar to workshops that you might take at Penland or Aramont. But because of some programming at the university and the gift, we're able to offer these workshops at a much lower rate than some of the craft school is. And a lot of that has to do with just we don't have any overhead. The university's here. The lights are on. And then the third component of that gift is it provides funding for our graduate program, which is really fantastic. We're able to offer full tuition teaching experience to our students, paid teaching experience to our grads, and then a stipend. Within our relationship with not only Beth but everything Morian in St. Pete, Florida, our graduate students and I take a couple trips down to St. Pete in the spring, and we call that the Morian Spring Residency. And part of the graduate curriculum is we go down and we take workshops at the Morian Workshop Space, which is right next to the Morian Center for Clay, so that the train station that everyone knows. There's a warehouse space that's been renovated. So on the top floor is 13 or 14 bedrooms, kind of a living room space. And then on the bottom floor is the kitchen and a giant studio. And that's where workshops take place. We're able to stay at that space. We all fly down together. I get to drive a van for a week, which is always exciting. And then we take workshops with various people. So one of the big ones is we go down for the wood firing that happens every year at the Morian Center for Clay. So that's Brad Schwiger, Matt Long, John Balasari, and Trey Hill's been the most recent addition to that. So we cook a big giant wood kiln, and then while it's cooling, we take a 2-day trip down to Miami and go see not only Mindy Solomon's space, but there's 12 or 13 stops, which is just fantastic work that we will never see in Michigan.
Yeah, and that relationship that Beth has created with ceramics, as you mentioned, it started, actually, it probably started before St. Pete, but listeners of the show will know that she was a big part of the Florida Heat Surface Conference. For years, we had it at the Morian Center for Clay, and actually we had it even when it was St. Pete Clay, even before that. So she's really been instrumental in supporting ceramics, and I guess I just want to say out loud, thanks to her for doing that.
Absolutely.
Because we need
Absolutely.
people with specific vision. Like ceramics, we have a lot of people giving small amounts of money, which I'm really grateful for. But with someone like Beth, she's been able to say, okay, I'm going to take these two towns and I'm going to support a ceramic community in these two towns and see what grows out of that. And there's been hundreds of artists that have either come through St. Pete and worked at the Morian Center for Clay, or now in Michigan. So it's kind of amazing how much impact she's been able to make in ceramics.
When I got hired, one of our early conversations, Beth and I were really thinking about with this gift to WMU, and we added a graduate program where there wasn't one before. Her vision of having a graduate program that is unlike any other program in the country, and that has been sort of our not sort of, that has been our goal moving forward. She and I, and my colleague Jessica Brandel are very committed to building a competitive program, but also one that is not like all the other programs in some ways. And being able to take students to Florida really builds a lot of life skills that I think students wouldn't normally get in graduate school. A couple of those being, it's fantastic to go to workshops. It's fantastic to learn different techniques from talented, internationally known artists. But we also have an opportunity to come back to school and talk about, okay, how did that workshop go? Because these are going to be future educators, they're going to be future leaders in our field. And so we're also looking at, how is that slide talk? How does this person present their work? Where has this person been professionally? I think it also builds a lot of skills within our students where, once you leave graduate school, you're not going to have this unlimited time to work on your work at all times. And so when we have to go to Florida, when we started this program, a lot of people were saying, how is this going to work? And it does work because we all do this already, right? Okay, I got 8 days until I got to get on a plane. So that means my clay's got to be at this stage. You know this, Ben. I'm going to cover things up and I'm going to come home and I'm going to get in a kiln. And those life skills, I can see my students being, it helps a little bit with procrastination. I can't help but think it's going to make them better professionals in the field, as whether they're in teaching or not. It's like it allows you to be more disciplined in the studio because of the travel. And then they come home with fantastic ideas. And I know for sure one of our graduate students is like, I saw this thing in Miami a year ago, and it's, all those beautiful things, right? As you want as a professor, it's like, yes, it worked. And the work's changed, and that's fantastic, and that's why we do it.
I wanted to wrap up talking about Michigan Mud, which is a conference that just happened, that y'all were the host of this year. And I was fortunate enough to be able to attend that and be a part of it in maybe 2018 or 19. It was a while ago. But I was so impressed because people showed up to the conference and they were so pumped because they had come from all over the Midwest, all over Michigan, and it had this real feeling of energy that was really nice. And you said this year that it was even bigger than it's ever been. So it's really a growing conference. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So the Michigan Ceramic Art Association, I believe, is, if not the oldest, one of the oldest sort of state ceramic institutions around the country. Its origins come out of uh, car construction, car modeling in Detroit, where they still do use clay as a modeling material. I believe almost 2,000 members are on the books statewide. Michigan is the 10th most populated state, I think, something like that. So there's a lot of people in Michigan, and then we're really fortunate. I think the board is really Michigan centric, but also thinking it as a Great Lakes institution, and the fact that when we do have it in southern Michigan, we're able to pull people, and we did this year from not only Chicago but northern Indiana, Ohio, Western New York isn't too terribly far away. And then, this year we hosted, my colleague Jessica Brandel and I were the on-site liaisons for the conference, and we had Paul Briggs and Kyungmin Park as our keynotes, and 2 days of demos, lectures, exhibitions. We had 25 artists doing their thing. So really a mini NCECA and at WMU. And yeah, there's just a lot of, and I didn't know anything about this when I moved to Michigan, but there's just a lot of energy. There's a lot of universities in Michigan also that just help with sort of, youth helps move things forwards and add energy. And then there's a huge craft community too. And there's a lot of clay centers popping up in the Detroit area, Grand Rapids. Clay is growing right now. And there was a lot of people that I met at the conference where this was their first conference. They're just getting into clay. They're asking about, okay, this was what's NCECA like? And it's like, you take all this and you times it by 10, and I'll plug Michigan's hosting NCECA this coming year in Detroit. So we're really excited about that as well.
To wrap up, can you plug your website? And then also, if a grad student is interested in potentially coming to WMU, can you talk about how they would find out more about the program?
So I'm on Instagram, triplett.kyle. It's Triplett, 2T's. And then kyletriplett.com is still holding on to the website, even though I think everybody's moving to Instagram. We always love people to visit campus, whether you're interested in our MFA program or our postbac program. If you're interested in coming to WMU to kick the tires and look around, I'm an email away. So it's kyle.triplett@wmich.edu. And then I'll just throw in the Frostick School of Art, which is our home institution, is wmich.edu/art. And all of our program information can be found there, application deadlines, that sort of thing.
Well, thanks so much, man. It's good to see you.
Yeah, same.
I'd like to thank Kyle for coming on the show. It was a pleasure to chat with him. And if you'd like to learn more about what the Morian Ceramic Research Center has to offer, you can check out their website. That's wmich.edu/Morian. I also wanted to thank today's sponsors. That's the Rosenfield Collection of Functional Ceramic Art, Cornell Studio Supply, and Snow Farm. If you or your organization is interested in becoming a sponsor, we'd love to have you on board for this upcoming season. You can get in touch and find out more at brickyardnetwork.org. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Thank you all for tuning in. If you'd like more information on the artists on the show, or if you'd like more information about the workshops and events that I'll be having in the next couple months, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook under Carter Pottery. Another great way to support the show is to leave me a comment on iTunes. To do that, search Tales of a Red Clay Rambler under iTunes Podcasts, and you'll find a page that's linked to our show. Thank you guys for the support.